Good evening, ranchers. Oh boy, I'm trying real hard to stay positive. In this video, I don't want to do a complaining video, but the weather has just been killing us. I can't remember the last time we saw sun. And definitely saw sun for 12 hours of the day. It has just been few and far between. And not only have we had sun, we have had rain and cold and wind, and it has just been wreaking havoc on the girls and the calves and the pasture. And quite honestly, my mental fortitude, because nothing is going to plan now. And nothing is going to plan. And I had to shift tactics. So that's what I want to talk about real quick here tonight. You guys saw in the last video, I put the herd back together, gave them those few days to fight it out, figure out who is who, get back in the normal herd mentality. And then I started strip grazing them. And I got 4 days. I got 4 days, which was 2 strips. So what I was doing, and I'll overlay some footage here of the aftermath of these strips, was I was putting them in for a day. I'd give them half of a strip, and then I'd feed hay, on top feed hay. Oh, buddy. So they were getting a good amount of dry matter, and they were obviously eating down the green pasture. They were really loving it. The problem is it's just been so wet and nothing's been growing. The sunlight and the temperature has been such that the cool season forages that we have out here, nothing has been growing. So on top of that, standing water, we have got standing water. It's just squishy. You take a step and you can, a 10-foot radius around you, you can hear the soil just squish. And it's like that in all of our pastures. Some are worse than others. So obviously I was worried about overgrazing. That's why I wanted to start strip grazing them, because the grass everywhere is not quite ready to be grazed yet. We had to get moving because I had to get them off of the spring lockup. Another video that I did, a small area that I put them in to finish feeding hay in really March and April, which normally April 15th is when about the time we start grazing. So I put them in this small area in March and beginning of April, start feeding hay. That way, when the grass starts growing, but not quite ready to graze yet, they're just kind of grazing a small amount of pasture. They're doing damage to the grass in a small amount of pasture. Then I can feed hay. I can still kind of control how much they're eating. The problem was the grass just started taking off, and they started doing damage in that spring lockup area. So normally where they would be in there for maybe 30, 45 days, we were already at about 60 days. And I still couldn't get them out of that spring lockup because the pastures were not ready to graze. I started moving them, started strip grazing them, and thinking that, those strips were going to buy me some time. The rest of the pastures were going to start growing any minute now. And we'd keep the damage to a minimum. Well, nothing's been growing, like I said. None of the grass has been taken off. And then all this rain we've been getting. What's up, mama? So I turned them loose. They are in this 2.5 acre pasture, but they have free run of it, except for the 2 strips essentially that I had grazed already. Yes, they are going to be regrazing stuff that, if you recall, the 2 girls, when they gave birth, they were put in this pasture with their calves. So they are going to be regrazing some of the stuff that they have already grazed. And they are going to obviously continue to eat and continue to graze the same grass that they have been chewing on and will continue to chew on for the next week. Looking at the forecast, we have about another week of this weather. And in fact, the reason why I decided this morning to pull the trigger and just basically do what you're never supposed to do and just open the gates and let them have free range was because we have another inch plus of rain coming. So it's going to be even more wet, because this is something I've been thinking about. It's been keeping me up at night. I'd wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and start thinking about this. And these were kind of some of the reasons I came up with. The first was these 2 dudes right here. Calf health is a big priority to me. I do not want to keep these calves in an area that is wet and muddy and not clean, not healthy for them, because the last thing I want is calf scours, or some sort of respiratory illness, because I'm just not keeping them in a clean environment. So making sure that the calves stay healthy is my biggest priority. Calf health and cow health, in my opinion, will trump pasture health for a short amount of time. There is an end in sight, obviously. I know that I am doing some damage to the pasture, but it's not going to be forever. So I am willing to put up with some pasture health issues before I put up with cattle health issues. Another big reason is, cow health. We are in that, post-calving, that enestrus time, as they call it, to where the two girls that have calved already, and then we have one more to go, breeding season is going to be upon us before we know it. Come July, first couple weeks of July is when I shoot to get the girls in for their first breeding attempt. And you may recall, I give the girls 3 chances just to keep my calving window at about 60 days, which is essentially 3 cycles that they have to get pregnant via AI. So that's going to be coming up here first week of July. I need to keep these girls healthy. I need to get them gaining as much condition as they can, so that enestrus time will ensure that they will be able to breed back. Heifers will take longer to come back into that regular cycle than cows will. And breeds can be specific too, but it can be anywhere from, really, you should be giving them, it can be anywhere from 15 to 90 days before you start seeing your cow kind of start coming back into heat. And the sooner that they do come into heat, he's chewing on her ear. The sooner that they do come into heat is kind of a good indication of how healthy that animal is. Again, a heifer is going to take a little bit longer, but if you've got a mature cow, that takes 90 days post-calving to start having her first cycle again to get ready for breeding. That's probably a pretty good indication that there's something wrong with that animal, whether it's nutrition or mineral or some sort of health problem. That's not good. So right now, as it stands, these two girls, they'll be at about 90 days enestrus. So they'll have about 90 days before the first breeding attempt happens again. Our mature cow up there, standing next to the red steer, she's due in about 25 days or so. That'll give her about 60 days, 50, 60 days enestrus before we'll get back into breeding with her. And that brings up a good point with her. She's in her last 30 days of gestation, and that last trimester, that entire last 3 months, is very important, nutrition and health of the dam for the viability and productivity of that calf. But that last 30 days is very important as well. So if I'm keeping these cows on an extremely muddy and wet and damp environment, on top of the cold, wet, windy weather that we've had, it just gives her more of a chance to get sick. And she's just not going to get 100% quality nutrition like she needs. I am still offering hay, and it's good quality hay. It's second cutting stuff. It's very green. It smells very good. So it is good quality hay. But nothing is going to be as good for her those last 30 days of gestation as some good high quality hay and some fresh green forage. Hence why I try and calve in spring, because I really want to give the new moms as much energy as they can to produce milk and keep condition, and I want to have the calves stay as healthy as possible. So this has just not been a typical spring. What do you want, big dog? So my biggest worry with the pasture, keeping them on these grazing strips. And granted, they were tighter strips, but they weren't as small and tight as they normally are during the grazing season. I did open them up a little bit. But my biggest concern on top of overgrazing was just the compaction. Even though these cows aren't huge, you know, Dexter cows are not huge, they still, on totally soaked standing water ground, they are really going to do some damage to that soil. So, you know, you saw kind of some of the footage of post grazing, and you can see what I'm talking about. But that is my biggest concern, is that that ground is going to become so hard and compacted once the rains do stop that we are going to have nothing but weeds grow over there. You know, I actually did see it a few years ago. The first time I had to do spring lockup for the cows, I chose an area that I kept them in, this area that was fairly excessively wet, but it was my first couple years grazing. I wanted to keep them in as small of an area as possible to give the entire 5 acres of pasture we have out here a chance to get a head start. And they really beat it up. Even though they were only on it for about 35 days, they really beat it up. And the rest of the year, very little grass grew on that, and it actually caused a pretty severe thistle outbreak, one that I'm still fighting today. So that was 3 years ago, and I still have a fairly decent amount of thistles in this front 2.5 acres because of that small spring lockup that I gave them that 1 year. So that was what I wanted to avoid this year. Again, I did not want to have the compaction, and in my mind, it was a lot easier to go ahead and just give them this whole area, let them possibly regraze some areas, but kind of spread out that hoof action and stop some of the pasture from turning into a thistle patch. So I do know there are some producers that their strategy is, and you might remember the video I did with a neighbor of mine, the Dennis McLaughlin, talking about his operation. His strategy even is on that area that is used for that kind of spring lockup, that spring hay feeding, calving yard possibly, that turns into summer annual pasture. So after the cows are moved off of that, they're back to grazing. After the cows are moved off of that and they're back to grazing, he'll come through, producers will come through and they might disc up the area, but they'll go ahead and plant some summer annuals. You're essentially reutilizing that area of the pasture to now help you get through that summer slump. Well, currently as it sits, I don't have a way to plan anything. It is on my radar. I have been after a small 2 or 3 row planter. Again, we don't have a ton of space out here, but that's just one thing that as we continue to go forward, as our herd sizes grow, this is going to continue to be a problem every year. Eventually, it could get to the point where I know that there's going to be one area of the pasture that's just going to be a true sacrifice area. It is going to get beat up. It's going to get overgrazed. It's going to, get muddy and compacted. But then every year I'll come through and I will plant down some summer annuals to be able to reutilize that area for summer grazing. So this is just one more thing that you have to think about if you are trying to run cattle on a very small micro scale is, the practice again is to have a sacrifice area that is not ruining any of your grazing pasture. Or, we all follow Greg Judy, kind of like Greg Judy's doing, where he still keeps his cows moving. It's just, even if they're grazing on certain areas that maybe aren't ready to be grazed yet, he has enough land base that he can avoid coming back to those areas until that grass is fully recovered. We don't have the land, again, 5 acres of pasture, 4 acres of leased pasture. We just don't have the space to be able to say, I'm going to take 2.5 acres out of the rotation and give it until the middle of July before we're back on it to ensure that it has fully recovered from the overgrazing that we did in April or May. It's just not possible. So something you have to think about we'll see how this experiment works out. I guess that brings up my last point. What I decided to do, and I hated doing it, but I already had the supplies here. It didn't cost me any money, and I thought it would be a good chance to test this theory to see if it works. What I ended up doing on those 2 strips that I have grazed that have been severely beat up is I put down some nitrogen fertilizer, just basic nitrogen fertilizer, nothing else, and more of the annual ryegrass seed. Again, the annual ryegrass will take off. It'll help get some immediate cover over those muddy areas, and they put in some pretty deep tap roots as well. So that annual ryegrass is going to help. Oh man, she's flying. That annual ryegrass is going to help with the compaction as well. And then obviously the nitrogen fertilizer, once we start getting some heat and some sun with all the rain we've had, it is just going to take off. That grass is going to explode. Again, my goal is to get as thick and lush as grass as possible over that beat up area, so it covers up that soil and hopefully stops any possible thistle development. You kids are crazy. They're just happy because it's semi-warm right now. Yeah, again, I hate complaining about the weather, especially when it's just rain, right? I mean, we all want more rain. I'm sure when the faucet turns off in the middle of July, I'm going to be, wishing I had the weather we've had the last 3 weeks. We're up to over 5 inches of rain in the last month. It's been insane. And I do know that, certain areas of the West were hit with a monster snowstorm this spring, right in the middle of their calving. I can only imagine the death loss that they had for calves and cows alike. So I'm trying to stay positive. I'm trying to realize that it's not that bad comparatively, but it's just frustrating when I wake up and there's another cloudy, cold, rainy day. Everyone's getting fired up. They have not been helping the situation either. The amount of rolling and rubbing and pawing that they've been doing at the grass, just drives me nuts because they're getting it so muddy and so beat up. Anyway, that's it, guys. I know I kind of rambled in this one. If you have any questions about what I'm doing, or again, any suggestions, those of you that are doing this on a small scale this time of year, or when you get into weird weather like this, stuff that you guys do, I'm all ears. Send them my way. I'd love to hear it. All right, we'll catch you at the next one.